My wife secretly had an affair with her boss, and I only found out when she tried to close on a $300, $0 property she swindled from her own father. Now she's claiming I owe her half the value, and the court says she's entitled to 60% of our savings, leaving me bankrupt and betrayed. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, telling a story about how my wife turned out to be nothing like the woman I thought I married. Honestly, it all started with little signs, things I brushed off at first. She was more irritable than usual, snapping at me over small stuff, acting distant even when we were supposed to be spending time together. But I just chalked it up to stress, work, or whatever. I mean, she was always busy, always on her phone, secretive about her texts. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me feel uneasy. Then there was the money. Always was the spender, but lately she'd been more secretive about it. She'd hide receipts, be vague about her bank statements. She'd brush me off when I asked questions, claiming she was just being careful with the bills. That should have been my first red flag, but I didn't want to believe my wife, the woman I loved, was hiding something. Things took a turn about 3 weeks ago when I noticed her acting weird around her phone. She'd suddenly be glued to her device late at night, texting or scrolling without stopping. One night, I caught her slipping her phone into her purse when I came into the room. I didn't think much of it at the time, but something about it felt off. That, and her suddenly canceling plans, coming home late without explanation, and lying about where she was. She told me she was working late or meeting friends, but her stories didn't add up. Then came the day I saw her email on the laptop. I wasn't snooping. I was just trying to get some work done, and her email popped up because she forgot to log out. I saw an email from her boss, Mark, guy I'd vaguely heard her mention. The subject line caught my eye. Meeting tonight, need to discuss the Johnson deal. Nothing suspicious there, right? Except the tone of the email was overly friendly, almost flirtatious, and there was a reply from her that said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Let's make sure no one finds out." My stomach dropped. My mind raced. My wife was cheating on me. I stared at that email for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was just work stuff, a joke, or some kind of misunderstanding. But then I remembered how she'd been acting secretive, evasive, distant, and the way she'd lied about her whereabouts. It all clicked into place. She was having an affair with her boss, Mark, and she'd been sneaking around behind my back for months. The worst part, I had no idea how deep it went or what she was capable of doing to keep it hidden. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew I needed proof. So I started digging. I checked her phone, her emails, her social media. I found more messages. Between her and Mark, explicit conversations, plans to meet up, even pictures. She'd even lied about her meetings, claiming she was working late when she was actually sneaking off to secret rendezvous. It was devastating. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The woman I'd trusted, the woman I loved, was betraying me in the worst way possible. That night I waited until she was asleep. Then I grabbed her phone and scrolled through her messages. I saw everything, her lies, her cheating, her betrayal. I felt a mix of rage, hurt, and heartbreak. How could she do this? How could she lie so effortlessly? And the worst part was realizing she didn't even care about how much she was hurting me. She was more focused on her affair, her secret life with Mark. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent. I had to confront her, but I also knew this wouldn't be the end. It was only the beginning of something much darker. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My head was pounding and my stomach was in knots. I couldn't sleep after what I'd found out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her lies, remembered the way she'd been acting so distant and cold. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew I had to plan it carefully. I wasn't about to let her spin some bullshit and make me look like the crazy one. I decided to wait until she got home from work. I wanted her to think everything was normal, at least for a little while. I needed to gather my thoughts, figure out what I was going to say, and most importantly, get more proof. I spent the day going over everything I'd seen, trying to stay calm but feeling like I was on the verge of losing it. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this and then have the nerve to lie? When she finally came home that evening, she was her usual bitchy self, snapping at me when I asked how her day was. I kept my cool, pretending everything was fine. I didn't want her to get suspicious. I told her I needed to talk to her about something important. Her eyes narrowed, and she immediately started with the usual excuses. She was tired, she was stressed, she didn't mean for things to get so complicated. I knew better. I knew exactly what she was trying to do, spin her story, deny everything, and keep her secrets safe. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew about Mark. Her face went pale for a second, then she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about? You're crazy," she spat, trying to brush it off. But I pressed harder. I pulled out the emails I'd printed, the messages I'd saved on my phone. I laid everything out on the table. Her eyes widened and her bitchy smirk turned into something else, defiance, maybe even panic. "You have no proof," she snapped, but her voice was shaky. I saw her trying to think fast, trying to come up with some lie or excuse, but I wasn't buying it. I told her I'd been snooping because I was worried, because I loved her and wanted to fix things. But instead, I found her lying, cheating, betraying everything we'd built. Her face twisted into a sneer and she said, "You're overreacting. This is all just a misunderstanding. Mark's just a friend. You're crazy if you think anything else is going on." I felt a cold rage rising. I couldn't believe how easily she lied, how she was trying to gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. I told her I had proof of her affair and I was done pretending. I told her I knew she'd been screwing her boss for months, that she'd been sneaking around and lying to my face. I told her I wasn't going to stand for it anymore, that I was done being the fool in her game. Her reaction was a mix of anger and contempt. She yelled at me, called me paranoid, said I was crazy for doubting her. She claimed I was just jealous, insecure, and that I was ruining everything. But I didn't care about her excuses anymore. I just wanted her out of my house, out of my life. I told her to pack her bags and leave, that I wasn't going to tolerate her betrayal, that I deserved better than a wife who cheated with her boss and lied to my face. She stormed out, screaming at me, calling me names I won't repeat. I watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to throw his wife out, but after everything I saw, I knew I couldn't stay. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but at the same time, a small part of me was finally free. That night, I sat alone in the silence of the house, staring at the empty space where she used to sleep. My mind kept racing, flipping through everything that had happened, every lie she told, every secret she kept. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious, furious at her, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. But deep down, I knew this was just the start. I'd find out just how far she'd gone and I'd make sure she paid for it. That's what revenge was for, right? To make someone understand the pain they've caused. And I was just getting started. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and clarity. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life. Every time I thought about her face, her lies, my stomach clenched with anger. But I also felt a strange sense of relief. At least I knew the truth now, and I could finally start piecing my life back together. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd left me with more than just heartbreak. She'd left me buried in debt and legal messes I never saw coming. The first thing I did was go through the financial mess she'd left behind. Turns out, had been hiding a lot more than just her affair. She'd been secretly swindling money from her own father, a man I'd always respected. She convinced him to buy her a property worth about $300, $0, claiming she wanted to flip it or rent it out. But she'd been secretly planning to sell it without telling anyone. I found out because I happened to see some emails from her father asking about the property, and she'd been dodging his calls. When I confronted her about it, her excuse was that she was saving for a rainy day and that I was just paranoid. What really floored me was discovering she'd already arranged a closing on the property. She was about to take that money and run. I couldn't believe she'd betray her own family like that, swindling her father out of his inheritance. I felt sick. The worst part, she used some of that money to fund her affair with Mark, I was pretty sure. It all clicked: the late nights, the secret meetings, the lying about her job. She'd been planning her escape for months, using her own family's trust to do it. And then things got worse. I found out she'd hidden a stash of cash, more than I thought she had, enough to make me question whether she'd been planning to leave me with nothing. She'd been draining our joint savings, too. When I looked at our accounts, I saw she drained almost 60% of what we had, claiming she needed personal funds or expenses for her new apartment. But I knew better. She'd been squirreling away money to fund her new life with Mark, probably planning to disappear once she had enough. The legal fallout hit me hard. Had already hired a lawyer, probably to fight for her share of our savings and to claim she was entitled to half of everything. The court documents showed she was demanding 60% of our savings, claiming she deserved it because she'd contributed equally to the marriage. That's when I realized how deep her greed ran. She wasn't just cheating, she was trying to take everything I had left. The house, our savings, everything. I was about to go bankrupt and I felt like I'd been punched again, only this time it was from the inside. I called my lawyer, trying to figure out my options. It was a nightmare. His lawyer was relentless, claiming that I owed her for emotional support and contributions to the marriage, even though I'd been working my ass off to keep us afloat. The court was leaning toward awarding her a hefty chunk of our savings, and I knew I was getting screwed. I was broke, betrayed, and staring at the possibility of losing everything I'd worked for, all because of her lies and greed. I kept replaying everything in my mind: her lies, her betrayal, her sneaky plans. The worst part, knowing she'd been lying to my face for months, pretending to be the perfect wife while secretly planning her escape with Mark and her stolen money. I felt like I'd been used, like I was some fool who didn't see the trap closing around him. But I also knew I had to fight back. I couldn't let her walk away with everything, not after what she'd done. I had to find a way to turn this around, even if it meant going to war in court. So I started gathering more evidence: texts, emails, bank statements. I needed proof that she'd been planning her escape all along, that she'd lied about her intentions, and that she was trying to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine. Every piece of evidence made me angrier, but it also gave me a little hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could fight this legally and come out of it with some shred of dignity intact. But I knew one thing for sure: had burned her bridges with me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not without a fight. The court date came faster than I expected, and I was a nervous wreck. Standing there in front of the judge, I felt like I was defending myself against a tidal wave of lies. His lawyer was sharp, trying to paint her as a victim, claiming she needed that 60% of our savings because she'd contributed equally to the marriage's success, even though she'd spent the last year sneaking around with her boss, stealing money and planning her escape. I presented my evidence: the emails, the bank statements, the proof of her deception. I showed the court how she'd been draining our joint account, how she'd secretly swindled her father, and how she'd lied about her whereabouts for months. I told the judge how she'd betrayed our vows and used me as a pawn in her game. I could see her smirking at times, trying to dismiss my claims, but I held my ground. I was fighting for my life, for what little dignity I had left. During the hearing, sat there with her arms crossed, trying to act like she was the victim. She kept insisting that I owed her, that she'd sacrificed so much, and that she was entitled to her fair share. She lied about how she only been doing what was best for us, even as I knew she was planning her next move, probably to get a bigger cut or to manipulate the court into giving her more. What really hit me was when her lawyer argued that she deserved half of everything because she contributed, though she'd been absent emotionally, physically, and financially for months. I wanted to scream, but I kept calm. Inside, I was boiling. I knew this was a game, and I was just trying to hold on to what little I had left. Finally, the judge made a ruling. She awarded 60% of our joint savings, leaving me with just enough to cover some debts and legal fees. The rest was gone, swallowed up by her greed and lies. I felt shamed and defeated, but also oddly relieved that I'd at least fought, that I'd stood up for myself. Still, I knew she'd come after more. Her plans weren't finished. She was still trying to take everything I had, and I had to be ready for the fallout. After the court, I sat outside in my car trying to process what just happened. I was drained, emotionally wrecked, but I also realized something. I was done trusting her, done believing her lies. I'd been a fool, but I'd also learned a hard lesson about who people really are. Wasn't the woman I thought she was. She was a manipulative, greedy liar who'd used me and everyone around her for her own benefit. That night, I started to think about my next steps. I couldn't fix what was broken, not with her anymore. I had to move on, rebuild my life from scratch. I'd lost a lot, my marriage, my savings, my trust. But I still had my dignity, and that was worth more than any amount of money. I realized I'd have to cut her out completely, no contact, no chance to manipulate or lie again. I also started looking into how to protect myself legally from her further attempts to drain me or steal more. I needed to make sure she couldn't do this again. She'd already shown her true colors, greedy, selfish, and willing to destroy everything for her own gain. I owed it to myself to stand tall, even if I was battered and broken. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I'd survive this. I'd come out the other side, maybe battered, maybe, but wiser. I'd learned that love can be a lie, trust can be a trap, and sometimes the only way to win is to fight back. Had played her hand and she'd lost. Now I just had to pick up the pieces and move forward. After the court's decision, life became a strange mix of relief and chaos. I tried to piece myself back together, but every day felt like walking through a fog of betrayal. The worst part was knowing was still out there, probably planning her next move. She had nothing to lose and everything to gain, especially if she managed to manipulate her way into even more money or some kind of revenge. I couldn't let her do that. I started by closing all joint accounts, changing my passwords, and hiring a private investigator. I needed to know if she was still active in trying to take more from me or if she was working on her next scam. The Pi found some suspicious activity. She'd been talking to some shady people, possibly trying to sell off more assets or find new ways to drain me. That's when I realized I had to cut her out completely, legally and emotionally. Meanwhile, I also had to deal with the fallout from her swindling her own father. I spoke with her dad, who was devastated. She convinced him to buy that property, promising she'd take care of everything. And now she was planning to sell it without telling him. I felt sick just thinking about it. I promised him I'd do everything I could to get that property back or at least stop her from doing anything further. It was a mess, but I knew I had to be the one to fix it, for his sake. As I gathered evidence of her ongoing schemes, I also started to realize just how deep her lies went. She'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even years. That's when I decided I couldn't keep pretending I was still married to her. I filed for divorce, knowing it was the only way to truly protect myself. I wanted her out of my life, out of my house, and away from my money. I was done being her pawn, her bank, her fool. The process was brutal. She fought me every step of the way, trying to drag things out, claiming she deserved more and accusing me of all sorts of things. But I had the evidence, and I made sure the court saw through her lies. Eventually, I got full custody of the house, and the judge ordered her to pay back some of the money she'd stolen. Not everything. She'd already hidden too much, but enough to make her realize she couldn't keep playing me for a fool. Throughout all this, I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. I was angry she'd done this, angry she'd used and betrayed me, but I was also relieved to be free of her. I knew I'd never trust her again, and that was a kind of liberation. I could finally start rebuilding my life without her pulling me into her chaos. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from this nightmare. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people closest to you can turn out to be the biggest predators. I should seen the signs earlier, but I was blinded by love, by the idea of a perfect life. Now I see that love isn't enough when someone is willing to lie, cheat, and steal. The biggest lesson: protect yourself, watch your back, and never ignore the red flags, no matter how much you want things to be different. Moving forward, I'm focusing on fixing my finances and rebuilding my confidence. I know I'll never get back what I lost: trust, money, time, but I can rebuild from this. I want to find someone who respects me, who's honest and true. As for I hope she gets whatever she deserves. She's burned every bridge she had, and I'm just glad I finally got out before she did more damage. This whole mess taught me that sometimes the only way to survive is to cut your losses, fight for what's right, and never let anyone take advantage of you again. I don't know what's next for me, but I do know I'm stronger than I thought, and I'll never let someone betray me like that again. In the end, I realized that the biggest lesson I could take from all this is how vital it is to trust your instincts, but also to protect yourself fiercely when things start to feel off. I used to believe in the fairy tale of love and loyalty, but that illusion shattered the moment I uncovered its true nature. It's a painful truth, but one that's made me stronger, more cautious, more aware. I've been through hell, losing my marriage, my savings, my sense of security. But I've also learned to stand up for myself, to fight back against the manipulation, and to see through the lies. I've come to understand that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from someone who no longer has your best interests at heart. That's what I did. I walked away, and I refused to let her define my life anymore. Reflecting on everything, I realized that revenge isn't always about getting even. It's about reclaiming your life, your peace of mind, and your dignity. I may have lost a lot, but I've gained clarity. I see the world more clearly now, and I know what to watch out for in the future. I know that trust isn't something to give blindly, and that sometimes you have to be your own protector. I hope sharing my story helps others recognize the signs early, those small red flags that seem insignificant at first but grow into something much darker. If you suspect your partner is cheating or hiding something, don't ignore it. Confront it head on. Gather evidence. Protect yourself legally and emotionally. Because once the trust is broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Most importantly, I want to say this: you are stronger than you think. No matter how much you're hurting right now, you can survive it. You can come out the other side battered but better for it. Life will throw its worst at you, but you have the power to take control and rebuild. I did, and I'm still doing it. And so can you. So to anyone reading this who's going through something similar, know this: you're not alone. Trust your gut, protect your heart, and never forget your worth. Betrayal hurts, but it doesn't define you. You define yourself, and you have the strength to start over, better, wiser, and more resilient than ever before.